Did you hear about the woman from Miami who went on vacation with her sister and ended up coming home in a casket?
That woman is Denisha Delancey, and the way she died has people all over the internet arguing about the same thing you are probably already wondering, which is how a carefree girls' trip turns into a funeral in less than 2 days. We are going to walk through every part of Denisha's last night. The club she walked into, the man she met inside it, the SUV she chose to ride in, and the bullets that nobody in her group saw coming, because the details are worse and stranger than the headlines make them sound. But before we get into Denisha's story, let's start with this story. Because during the same stretch of weeks that people were fighting online about whether Denisha put herself in danger, another young mother in Georgia was losing her life inside her own home, in front of her own children, and almost nobody outside her city ever learned her name. Her name was Lexis Antrom, and to understand why her death cut so deep, you have to understand the family she came from and the pattern that had been following that family for years. Lexis Antrom was a 28-year-old woman living in Columbus, Georgia, and the first thing everybody who knew her wanted the world to understand is that she was a mother before she was anything else. She had 2 sons, ages 7 and 13, 2 boys who called her Mama, and who would end up carrying the weight of what happened inside that house for the rest of their lives. Her own mother, a woman named Tunisia Seals,
I just talked to her a couple of days ago. We were making plans to go on a family trip.
Described her as a giver, somebody who put family first, somebody who spoke her mind, and did not let anybody run over her. That combination, a soft heart for her people, paired with a mouth that told you the truth, is the version of Lexis her family keeps trying to protect, now that she cannot speak for herself, because the headlines only ever remember how a person died and almost never bother to say how they actually lived. What comes through in the way the family talks about her is that Lexis was the glue. She was the only daughter, and she had brothers, and she sat right in the middle of everybody as the person they all leaned on. Her mother explained that the brothers would call Lexis to vent about their mama, and their mama would call Lexis to vent about the brothers, so she was the one holding the whole family together from the center. Seals even remembered talking to her just a couple of days before everything fell apart, and the thing they were planning was a family trip, which tells you exactly where this young woman's head was at, on her people and on getting everybody together. Lexis also had a dream that had nothing to do with Columbus. Her mother said more than once that Lexis wanted to be an actress, that she talked about it and reached for it, even though the public record of her life is thin and there are no headshots or credits floating around under her name. What we do know is that she came from a family with deep roots in Philadelphia, a place the relatives kept calling back home, and when everything went wrong, it was Philadelphia they wanted to bring her body to, so she could rest somewhere that felt like it truly belonged to them. That dream of acting says something about who she was, a young woman in Columbus who was still looking past her circumstances towards something bigger, still building toward a version of her life that she never got the chance to reach. The public record of that dream is thin, no reel, no credits, just a mother telling anyone who would listen that her daughter wanted more out of life. And now that is one of the only pieces of her ambition left for the world to hold on to. Here is the part of the background that turns this from a sad story into something that had been building for a whole generation. Lexis did not come from a family that was new to this kind of violence. Her mother spoke openly, in the days after, about a long family history of domestic violence. And the piece of that history that stops you cold is that Tunisia Seals lost her own mother and father years earlier, when one of them killed the other and then took their own life. So when we talk about what happened to Lexis, we are not talking about a single bad night. We are talking about a pattern that had already reached back at least one full generation and swallowed the people who came before her, which is exactly why her mother would later beg strangers to break the cycle before it reached their children too. The person at the center of Lexis's own version of that pattern was her husband, a 22-year-old named Kevon Davenport, whose name shows up as Kevon in a couple of the early reports. There is almost nothing about him in the public record before February of 2026. No long list of past arrests tied to this case, no interviews, and no real profile of who he was. What we do have is the way his own mother-in-law described the phone calls she used to get from him. Because before any of the shooting ever happened, Kevon was already reaching out to Lexis's mother about the fighting in that relationship. Tunisia Seals said he had actually seemed respectful to her and that he had phoned her about the arguments the couple were having, and in her own words, she laid out the position she tried to hold with two grown people who were supposed to be handling their own lives.
He had called me in regards to, I guess, them arguing about some stuff that happened. And I try to stay out of my children's stuff because they're grown.
That is a mother telling you she got the phone calls, she heard the arguing, she gave the best advice she had, and she still had no idea how bad it really was behind that door. That is the whole tragedy of so many of these situations packed into a single sentence. The warning signs are all there, but they look like normal couple problems right up until the day they are not. And by the time everybody finally understands what they were actually looking at, it is already too late to do anything but grieve. The night everything ended came early in the morning on February 12, 2026. It was still dark out, right around 4 in the morning. The kind of hour where a phone call to the police almost always means something has already gone terribly wrong. Officers with the Columbus Police Department got a call about a shooting at a home in the 4500 block of Gardner Drive on the south side of the city. And when they got inside, they found Lexus shot and unresponsive. One of the earliest reports described her as being found on a bedroom floor with a gunshot wound. The Muskogee County coroner, a man named Buddy Bryan, pronounced her dead at the scene at 4:50 in the morning, and her body was sent to the state crime lab in Decatur for an autopsy. But Lexus was not the only person in that house with a bullet in them, and this is the detail that made the whole thing confusing in those first few hours. Officers also found her husband Kevon with a gunshot wound of his own, described in one local report as a wound to the lower body or the leg that was not life-threatening, and he was rushed by ambulance to Piedmont Columbus Regional for treatment. So from the very first minutes, this was not a stranger in the night or a break-in gone wrong. This was two people who lived together, both shot, inside the home they shared, and in that early stretch, the police had not even publicly called it domestic violence yet. They were working an open shooting investigation, and the full picture only came together the following day. The detail that makes this one almost unbearable is who else was in that home. Multiple reports say the shooting happened in front of Lexus's two young sons, the 7-year-old and the 13-year-old, which means two children were left to witness the very worst night of their lives, and then somehow live with the memory of it forever. When the sun finally came up, neighbors watched investigators still working the house, with the front door hanging wide open, and an animal control officer even came out to take custody of two dogs that a neighbor had been holding through the chaos. Little details like that are what make a scene real: an open door and two dogs with nowhere to go, while a family's entire world collapsed inside. Once detectives with the department's Violent Crimes Unit got into it, the story came together fast. Investigators determined that Kevon and Lexus had been involved in a domestic dispute that led to the shooting, and rather than wait, they moved to charge him while he was still lying in a hospital bed. Detectives established probable cause, got their warrants, and served them on Davenport while he was still hospitalized, with the plan being to move him straight to the Muskogee County Jail the moment doctors cleared him. The lead investigators even put out a public tip line, listing Sergeant Donna Baker as the contact and inviting anonymous tips, which tells you how much of this case was still being built out in those early days. The charges he is facing are murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Those are the only two charges that have been made public, and because this is such a recent case in Georgia, a lot of what usually fills out a story like this simply is not out there yet. There is no public trial coverage, no plea, no bond information, and no detailed account of the exact order of events inside that home, which is normal for a fresh murder case that still has to be fought in front of a jury. Everything he is accused of still has to be proven in court, and until it is, the full inside story of that morning stays behind closed doors. One thing worth pointing out, because it matters for how these cases get talked about, is that none of the public reporting turned up a paper trail of earlier trouble at that home. There were no widely reported past domestic violence calls to the address, no restraining orders on record, nothing official that would have flagged this couple as a danger waiting to happen. The only real warning that existed was the one Lexus's mother carried quietly, those phone calls about the arguing. And that is exactly the problem. So much of this kind of violence never makes it into a police file until the night it turns deadly, which means the people closest to it are often the only early warning system there is, and they usually do not realize what they are looking at until it is already over. What the family did not keep behind closed doors was their grief. Tunisia Seals stepped in front of the cameras in the middle of February and said out loud what a lot of mothers in her position are simply too broken to say.
One of the reasons why I have been reaching out, as everybody is aware of, that my daughter Alexis, my only daughter, was murdered last Thursday. It's crazy because just last month, January 16th actually, to be exact, made 27 years that my mother was murdered. January 4th.
She talked about the guilt of not pushing harder when she first heard about the arguments, and she used her own daughter's death to beg other people trapped in violent relationships to get out before it ever reached this point, pointing straight back at that family history that had already taken her own parents. A fundraiser called A Heartfelt Farewell for Lexis was set up to help bring her body to Philadelphia, cover the funeral, and pay for therapy for the two boys who now have to grow up without their mother, with the family reaching toward a $30,000 goal. The community gathered for a balloon release in her memory. And then, like so many of these cases, the news cameras drifted away while the family stayed stuck in the worst day of their lives. And the two people left holding the heaviest part of all of this are her sons. A 7-year-old and a 13-year-old do not get to move on when the coverage stops. They have to grow up carrying what they saw and what they lost, which is exactly why the family pushed so hard to raise money for their therapy, because losing a mother is one wound, and witnessing how they lost her is a completely different one on top of it. And if you are watching this, and something in it hits a little too close, that mother's message is worth repeating in plain words. Leaving is hard, leaving is frightening, and it often takes a person more than one try to actually get out. But there are people whose entire job is to help quietly and for free, whether that is the 24-hour helpline at Hope Harbor in Columbus or the National Domestic Violence Hotline that anybody in the country can reach any hour of the day. Nobody should have to sit inside that kind of danger by themselves. That is Lexis, a young mother whose warning signs looked exactly like ordinary arguments right up until the morning they were not. Our second woman was living a completely different kind of life, thousands of miles away from any of this, out on a Caribbean beach with her sister, and the danger that reached her did not come from anybody she loved or lived with. It came from a total stranger she had known for only a few hours. To understand what happened to Denisha Delancey, you first have to understand who she actually was before that plane ever left Miami, because so much of the online noise about her death completely erases the real person underneath it. Denisha Delancey was 29 years old, born and raised in Liberty City, a historically black neighborhood in Miami that people from there wear like a badge of honor. Friends kept calling her a certified baddie from Liberty City, which is really just their way of saying she was confident, stylish, and fully herself, the kind of woman whose energy filled up a room the second she walked into it. She was not some aimless party girl with no direction either, the way the meaner corners of the internet tried to paint her. Denisha was a Florida State University graduate, somebody with a real education behind her, and the people closest to her described her the same way over and over again, as vibrant, full of life, and someone who loved to travel, enjoy herself, and make memories. She had a bright smile that lit up every room, and a laugh people could not forget. And this part matters more than anything. She had no criminal history, no ties to any gangs, and no connection at all to the dark world that would eventually reach out and swallow her up. The people who loved her had a whole handful of nicknames for her, and the one that keeps coming up is Baby Girl, which tells you the kind of place she held in her family. She was the joyful one, the one with the contagious laugh who could turn an ordinary afternoon into a good time, and she carried that same Liberty City confidence into everything she did. When you strip away the headlines and the arguments, what you are left with is a normal, fun-loving 29-year-old woman with a degree, a tight circle, and a life she was clearly enjoying, which is exactly the kind of person these tragedies love to reduce to a lesson instead of a human being. The trip itself was supposed to be one of the happiest kinds of trips there is. Denisha flew out to Sint Maarten, the Dutch side of a small Caribbean island, to celebrate her sister Sincaria's birthday, and it was just the three of them, Denisha, her sister, and one close friend, flying out of Miami together for a girls' trip. This was reportedly their first time ever visiting the island, so everything about it was fresh and exciting, the kind of getaway you plan for months and count down the days to. What makes it hurt even more is that the whole reason they were there was to celebrate. This was Sincaria's 29th birthday, and the sisters were close enough to fly across the water together and turn a birthday into a real memory, rather than just another dinner back home. You can picture how the group chat probably looked in the weeks leading up to it. The outfits, the flights, the excitement building day by day. 3 friends counting down to a trip that was supposed to be nothing but good times. Nobody packs a bag for a birthday trip thinking one of them will be flying home in a casket, and that gap between what this was supposed to be and what it became is the part that has stuck with so many people online. Here is the part the victim-blaming crowd almost always leaves out. These women were not careless, and they did not go over there acting reckless. They actually took the exact precautions you are supposed to take. They booked a private Airbnb on the Dutch side and arranged a private driver for the entire stay, specifically so they would not have to depend on random strangers or sketchy rides to get around. They did exactly what smart, safety-minded travelers are told to do, and it still was not enough to save Denisha. And that is honestly one of the most unsettling things about this whole case, because it means doing everything right did not matter once she crossed paths with the wrong man. The trip moved fast because it was so short. They landed, they got themselves together, and they went straight into enjoying the island, hitting a day party, the beaches, and even a bar with rope swings on what looks like their very first day there. It was music, sunshine, and the kind of pure vacation energy you save up a whole year for. 3 friends living it up with no reason on earth to think anything could go wrong. Videos and posts from those first hours show exactly what you would expect: the excitement of landing somewhere new, the beach, the drinks, the laughing, all the little moments that make a trip feel worth every dollar it costs to get there. For most of that day, this was simply a beautiful, ordinary girls' trip, the kind that ends with a camera roll full of memories and an inside joke or two, and there was nothing in any of it that hinted at how the night was about to go. And then, on that very first night out, they headed to a nightclub, and that single ordinary decision is where the story quietly began to turn. The club was called the White Rabbit, also referred to in some of the police-sourced reporting as Nowhere Special, the same venue over in the Maho area of the island. Inside that club, Denisha met a man named Quincy Damon Sylvester, a Trinidadian man who had been living on the island for a long time, and whose name even shows up in some reports with slightly different spellings, a small thing that hints at how quietly this man moved through the world. By the accounts that circulated afterward, he came across as generous and charming that night, the kind of man who makes an easy, good first impression, and Denisha had no way in the world of knowing anything about who he really was or what was quietly circling him in that same room. Everything about that meeting looks like it was completely spontaneous, just 2 people ending up in the same spot on a busy night out. There was no prior connection, no arrangement, nothing that Denisha had planned in advance. She met a man in a club on a fun trip, he treated her well, and by the end of the night she felt comfortable enough to leave with him, which is a thing that happens on vacations all over the world every single weekend. The difference here is that this particular man came with a shadow attached to him, and that shadow was already sitting a few feet away, watching. Because, while Denisha was enjoying her night and getting to know this seemingly generous stranger, there were other people inside that club who were not there to party at all. Police would later recover surveillance footage from the club, showing unknown men monitoring, watching, and following Sylvester the entire night. They were tracking his every move, sitting back and waiting for their moment, and Denisha had walked directly into the middle of a hunt without a single clue it was happening. She thought she had simply met a nice man on vacation. What she had actually done, without knowing it, was step right next to a marked target with a countdown running over his head. When the club started to wind down, the group made the split-second decision that the entire internet would later put under a microscope and pick apart. Sincaria and the friend headed back to the Airbnb with their private driver, the safe plan they had arranged from the very start, and Denisha chose to leave separately with Sylvester in his SUV. One detailed account even describes Sylvester dropping the sister and the friend off first before continuing on with Denisha, so this was not some reckless disappearing act. It was a night winding down the way plenty of vacation nights do. It was the kind of small, ordinary choice people make on trips all the time without a second thought, leaving with someone you clicked with, and in nearly every version of that night it means absolutely nothing. On this one night, it meant everything. Sometime in the early morning hours of March 2nd, 2026, around 3:30 in the morning, that SUV was driving down a quieter road in Phillipsburg called Arlett Peters Road, also known as Old Cakehouse Road, when the men who had been watching all night finally made their move. Gunmen ambushed the vehicle and opened fire, and under that gunfire, the SUV lost control and flipped over. Both people inside were shot, and both of them were gone before help could ever reach them. What happened next is almost cruel in how normal it looked at first glance. When police got that first call, it came in as a vehicle rollover, just a bad accident, an SUV lying upside down with two unresponsive people trapped inside. Officers first treated it as a serious traffic crash, and early on there were even loose accounts of some sort of altercation or chase after a festive night out. It was only when they got in close and found bullet holes in the vehicle that the whole thing flipped from a car accident into something far darker, and the case was quickly reclassified as a double homicide. So how did the family even find out their girl was gone? This is one of the saddest small details in the entire case. Back at the Airbnb, the private driver called Denisha's sister and friend to check on them, and it was during that phone call that he told them the man Denisha had left with had been found dead. That call is what pushed the women to raise the alarm and report it, and it is how a birthday celebration turned into a nightmare in the space of just a few hours, with two of them safe at the Airbnb and the third one already gone. Now here is the man at the center of it all, the real target, because Denisha was never the point of any of this. Quincy Damon Sylvester ran what looked on the surface like a completely normal business, a PVC pipe sales and installation company over in the Cahill area of the island. Police and multiple outlets described that business as a front for drug trafficking and organized crime, and they painted him as a suspected kingpin with ties to regional drug networks and gang rivalries stretching across the Caribbean, with the island itself long known as a transit point for narcotics. It is worth being fair and clear here, because he was never arrested or convicted of any of that in his lifetime, and those descriptions come from police intelligence gathered after his death rather than from any court. But that same intelligence is exactly why investigators believe he was the clear, intended target of a carefully planned hit, and Denisha just happened to be sitting in the passenger seat. There are even sensational videos online claiming there was a bounty on him worth $1 million, but the serious reporting does not back that number up, so take it as rumor, not fact. The investigation, run by the St. Martin Police Major Crimes Team, leaned on 3 big pieces of evidence, and every one of them points at planning rather than plain bad luck. There was the club surveillance showing those men shadowing Sylvester all night long. There were the bullet holes that told the real cause of the crash. And there were the targeted house searches police ran across the island the very same day, which turned up enough to let them move quickly. By March 4, 2026, just 2 days after the shooting, they had arrested a Trinidadian man, identified only by the initials AH, who remains in custody, while the main suspect and the other shooters are still out there somewhere. All of the suspects are believed to be Trinidadian nationals tied to the same criminal world Sylvester was living in, and police have kept up their public appeals for tips as the case slowly deepens. Denisha's body was brought back home to Miami, and her family gave her the send-off her online critics never gave her the grace of. There was a visitation on April 3rd and a celebration of life on April 4th, handled through Mitchell Funeral Home, complete with an all-white coach and a motorcycle procession that matched the bright, unforgettable energy people kept describing when they talked about her. And through all of it, her sister Sincaria was fighting a second battle that no grieving family should ever have to fight, the one against the comment sections. As people online lined up to blame Denisha for leaving with a man she barely knew, Sincaria pushed back hard against the victim blaming and the false malicious stories, reminding everybody that this was a tragedy, not a lesson to sit around and pass judgment on a dead woman's choices.
I'm on my way to see my sister, so I thought now would be the perfect time to get on here and say something, because there is just too much victim blaming going on. No matter how y'all try to spin a story, no matter if y'all blaming me, y'all blaming her, whatever, it does not fucking matter. Y'all don't know me and y'all don't know her.
The whole online fight split into 2 camps, one telling black women to never leave their group while traveling, and the other one saying the only people who did anything wrong that night were the men holding the guns. Both things can be true at once. You can learn from a tragedy without ever putting the blame on the person who was killed. The case also cracked open a much bigger conversation about how safe these Caribbean getaways really are, especially for Black American women who save up and travel in groups expecting paradise. A refrain started spreading online: if you go out together, come back together, along with the usual advice about sticking with your people, sharing your location, and staying aware of your surroundings after dark. Some of that advice is genuinely useful, but the uncomfortable truth in Denisha's case is that she and her sister actually did most of it: the private driver, the safe plan, the group looking out for each other, and it still could not protect her once she stepped into the orbit of a man who was marked for death by people she never even saw. That is two women now, both gone, both loved, and both turned into arguments online instead of being allowed to simply rest in peace. Our third woman lived in the brightest spotlight of all three, watched by millions of people every single day, and the danger that finally found her did not come from a husband or from a stranger tied to a drug war. It came from a fan she had never met in her life, a man who had convinced himself he was in love with a person who did not even know he existed. If you were anywhere on Instagram over the last several years, there is a real chance you scrolled right past her without ever knowing her real name, because to the world she was simply Miss Mercedes Moore. Her actual name was Janae Gagnier. She was 33 years old, and she had built one of the most recognizable brands in the entire social media game, with a following of around 2.6 million people hanging on her every post. Listen to how the people who actually raised her talk about her, because it is a very different picture from the glamorous one you saw online. Janae came up the hard way and built herself into a brand, one piece at a time. She was born back in November of 1987 to parents who split up when she was young, and she grew up shuffling between California and Texas after their marriage came apart. Even as a kid, she had the hustle in her. And the story her family loves to tell is that at just 12 years old, she turned the family garage into a little hair salon and was braiding hair for $60 a session. She was a girly girl who cared about how she looked, and a businesswoman before she was even old enough to drive, and both of those things pointed straight at where her life was headed. Her family life was not always simple. Her parents had met while her father was in the military and married young before things eventually fell apart, and Janae grew up bouncing between the two of them. But out of all of that, she stayed close to a younger half-sister named London, a little sister she doted on, the kind of bond where the older one lets the younger one ride on the handlebars of her bike. Her family would later call her a beacon of light, and it was London who would end up being one of the first voices to tell the world the truth about how her sister actually died. Her real come-up started when she left a dental assistant program behind and moved to Las Vegas, where she started dancing under the name Mercedes Moore, a name she picked because Mercedes sounded like luxury, and Moore stood for her hunger for more. She was pulling in $4,000 to $5,000 on a good weekend, and she treated all of it as a stepping stone, not a destination. From there, she poured everything into the internet, growing her Instagram into the millions, expanding onto OnlyFans for exclusive content, and networking her way into serious rooms with names like Drake, Travis Scott, and Offset. She had plans stacked on top of plans too, a leggings line and a hair business she wanted to launch, because she was trying to turn internet fame into something that would still be standing long after the photos stopped trending. The interesting thing is that the woman millions of people followed, and the woman her family knew were almost two different people, and she carried both of them at once. Out in public, she was Mercedes, the life of the party, the one twerking at a shoot or going live on Instagram, and behind closed doors, she was Janae, the one who wanted to curl up in bed with a bonnet on her head and just relax. That split is part of why her rise felt so real to people. She was glamorous on camera but grounded off of it. Even her friend and manager put it in a way that captures both sides of her, describing how Mercedes was more the fun party person, while Janae was the one who would get one eyelash on and then give up and curl right back into bed. Even her beginnings carry that same doubleness, with some accounts placing her birth in El Paso, Texas, and others in Los Angeles, a small blur that fits a woman who spent her whole childhood moving between two worlds. Her lifestyle by then had her running in rooms most people only see on a screen, and back in 2019, she was partying in Drake's private section on a trip to Miami, getting the full VIP treatment, which shows you just how far the little girl from the garage salon had climbed. But that same fame carried a shadow that her family saw coming long before the rest of us ever did. Her father, Mark Gagnier, later said the family kept her real life extremely private, that few people even knew her actual name, and that he warned her over and over about the obsessed strangers her beauty and her platform kept pulling in. This was not paranoia coming out of thin air either. Back in 2017, Janae had already been doxxed once. Her home address leaked online by a fan, and that scare pushed her toward living behind the walls of gated communities for her own safety. She understood, better than most people ever will, that being adored by millions of strangers is not remotely the same thing as being safe. That is why she guarded her real identity so tightly. Millions of people knew the face and the name Mercedes Moore, but almost nobody, not even some of the people around her, knew her by Janae. She kept those two worlds separated on purpose, the public brand on one side and the private woman on the other, precisely so that the strangers who loved the pictures could never reach the person behind them. When you know that, the way she died lands even harder, because the one thing she worked hardest to protect, her real self and her real location, is exactly the thing a stranger managed to get to anyway. Everything she built to keep the wrong people out did not keep out the one who came for her. By the summer of 2021, Janae was actually in a really good place in her life. She was talking about settling down, about marriage and kids with a supportive boyfriend, and she was right in the middle of getting ready to move into a new home in the Houston area. She was living in the gated Cortland complex in Richmond, Texas, a place she had chosen specifically because it was supposed to be secure, and by every single account she was careful, she was private, and she was cautious about who got anywhere near her real world. The trouble started quietly, the way it so often does, with nothing but silence. Over a weekend in late August of 2021, Janae, who was known for staying in steady, constant contact with her family, suddenly went quiet. Her people could not reach her, and it was completely unlike her to just stop answering, especially to her father and her sisters, the ones she checked on almost every day. As the calls and the texts kept going nowhere, that silence stopped feeling like a woman who was simply busy and started feeling like something was very wrong. And her father, sitting there with the exact gut feeling every parent on earth dreads, decided he could not keep waiting around for an answer that was never going to come. On August 29, 2021, Mark Gagnier drove out to his daughter's apartment, and what he walked into is the kind of thing that stays burned into a person forever. Here is that moment, told the way the family and the reporters on the ground laid it out. He found the door locked and got no answer, so he kicked it down, and at the bottom of the stairs he found Janae, already gone. Upstairs, he found a man he had never laid eyes on before, a 34-year-old from Wellington, Florida, named Kevin Alexander Accordo, still barely alive, but in his final moments, dying from wounds he had turned on himself. There is no soft way to describe what that father saw in those minutes, and you can hear the full weight of it when he explains why he refused to wait even one more second at that door.
To the place because I kicked the door, and so after the police left, we had to secure the door and stuff. So we went in, just grabbed a couple of things, grabbed some paperwork and stuff, secured the door. I mean, it was just disgusting inside. And I prepared everybody because I had been inside. When we left, I got home that night. If I slept an hour, that might have been it, because when the detective told me that she would have been strangled, that's all I can think in my mind is I did not want my daughter to go out in any kind of pain or suffering or any kind of traumatic anything. And I would have been happy with the thought in my mind that he pushed her.
The medical examiner later ruled that Janae died from strangulation and a traumatic concussion, and that Accordo died from multiple self-inflicted stab wounds. In plain words, this man got into her home, took her life, and then unalived himself right there. And because he took his own life, there was never going to be a trial, never a courtroom, and never the closure that comes from watching somebody stand up and answer for what they did. The part that turned this from a horror story into a genuine mystery was the walls. When investigators and family looked around that apartment, they found rambling messages scrawled all over the walls in lipstick and pen, and those messages were the words of a man completely lost inside his own delusion. He had written things like that he wished he had never met her, that he should have stayed in Florida, and that he had been used for money, a strange mix of apology, obsession, and a sense of betrayal that only ever existed inside his own head. One of the lines he left behind claimed that Janae had led him to think she cared about him, but wore another man's ring, which is a stunning thing to read when you understand there was no relationship there for her to betray. Some accounts even suggest he had been inside that apartment for 2 or 3 days, writing on those walls the whole time. And here is the detail that makes it truly chilling. There was no relationship between them at all. He was a stranger from another state, a man with no real criminal history, and Janae did not even know he existed. Her father said it about as plainly as it can ever be said. And that left the police chasing the single hardest question in the whole case, which is how a stranger all the way from Florida even got inside a gated, secured complex to reach her, when there were no signs of forced entry to be found anywhere. Watch investigators try to make sense of the exact same thing everybody else was stuck on. The love people had for her came pouring out after she was gone. Drake dedicated his album to her memory, and Cardi B publicly went off in her defense against the cruel comments piling up online. The exact same kind of disrespect Denisha's family had to fight through too.
When something happens like this,
Janae was just a light, to be honest, and not just outside of the home, but she was very protective of me, protective of her dad, and she just was always the sweetest thing.
But her family also had to battle a wave of flat-out lies, with rumors spreading online that she had been shot or robbed, false stories that her father could not stand hearing while he was trying to bury his child. Listen to him call it out.
all this other stuff going on social media about she was shot and robbed and all the other stuff, you should be ashamed of yourselves for letting out false information just to get the story and not coming to us and or waiting for the real story.
Right.
The family laid her to rest with a memorial service in Rosenberg, Texas, in early September of 2021, and a fundraiser set up in her honor described her the same way her family always had, as a beacon of light to so many. Police, for their part, promised the family they would keep digging, with a lieutenant on the case assuring them there would be answers, even though the man responsible had already put himself beyond the reach of any courtroom. A big piece of what investigators were still chasing was simply how Accordo had traveled all the way from Florida to Texas and pinpointed her exact door, a trail they were quietly working to reconstruct. Underneath all the celebrity tributes and all the online noise was a father who had to hear exactly how his daughter died, and who could not stop turning over whether she suffered in her final moments. If Janae's death feels like it came out of nowhere, it actually fits a pattern that experts already have a name for. Psychologists call it erotomania, a delusion where somebody becomes convinced that a person they have never really met is secretly in love with them, and social media makes the whole thing so much worse by handing obsessed strangers a fake sense of closeness through a screen. We have watched this exact thing turn deadly before. The actress Rebecca Schaeffer was killed back in 1989 by an obsessed fan who hunted her down after building a fantasy about her in his head. And years later, the singer Christina Grimmie was shot and killed by a man who had constructed an entire imaginary relationship with her and had never once actually met her. Janae's case is that same nightmare, only faster and closer, powered by the massive following she built with her own two hands. Which is the cruel twist of it. The very thing she worked so hard for is what put her in a stranger's crosshairs. There is one more thread that ties all three of these families together, and it is an ugly one. Every single one of them had to bury their girl while also fighting the internet. Lexus's mother had to relive her guilt in public. Denisha's sister had to beg strangers to stop victim-blaming her dead sibling, and Janae's father had to stand in front of cameras and call out the lies being spread about how his daughter died. On top of losing someone, each of these families had to defend that person's name against a world that treated real death like content. That part is not in the police reports, but it is just as real as anything else in these stories. So look at what these three women leave us with when you put them side by side. Lexus Antrom was a young mother whose danger lived right inside her own home and wore the face of the man she married, and it took her life in front of her babies. Denisha Delancey was a college graduate on a birthday trip who took every smart precaution there was and still got pulled into a stranger's private war just for sitting in the wrong seat at the wrong moment. And Janae Gagnier was watched and adored by millions and was reached anyway, inside a locked and gated home, by a man she never even knew was alive. The hard lesson sitting underneath all three of them is that danger does not always show up looking the way we expect it to. Sometimes it is the husband, sometimes it is a charming stranger on vacation, and sometimes it is a fan behind a screen you will never see coming, and not one of these three women did a single thing to deserve what happened to her. The only people who carry the blame are the ones who chose violence.
This is Kenesha Gaines, a 21-year-old mother of two and aspiring hairstylist who would be found dead in the most gruesome ways in the early morning hours of July 30th, 2023. But before we get to how this tragedy unfolded and the disturbing silence that followed, let me take you back to that night where 9 women gathered for a birthday party. The air was thick with celebration in Chicago's North Lawndale neighborhood on that summer night. It was the kind of gathering that happens in backyards across America every weekend, a luau-themed birthday party where friends come together to escape the pressures of everyday life, to laugh and dance and simply be young. The party was being held in the 1500 block of South Keeler Avenue, and the women who gathered there that night ranged in age from their early 20s through their early 30s. Among them was Kenesha Gaines, known affectionately as Nesha to those who loved her. She had so much to be proud of that summer. Just weeks before, she had landed a job in home health care that genuinely excited her, telling her mother with unfiltered joy, "I finally found that job I could do. I found something that I like and I can do it." But her ambitions extended beyond healthcare. Kenesha had launched her own small business called Cutie Collections, specializing in quick weaves, sew-ins, and customized wigs. She would share her work online, showcasing her talent with pride, building a reputation as a skilled stylist who could transform someone's look with her hands and her vision.
Kenesha was a funny everything. She was so outgoing. She was the queen of the world.
Her mother's words capture the essence of who Kenesha was: vibrant, confident, someone who lit up every room she entered. But to truly understand the weight of what happened that night, you need to understand what Kenesha's family had already endured. 4 years earlier, in 2019, Kenesha's 18-year-old brother, Keyshawn, was fatally shot. The grief of losing a child to gun violence is something no parent should ever experience. Yet Kenesha's mother, Natasha Graham, had to carry that weight every single day. She had told people that losing another child to gunfire was her #1 fear, a dread so consuming that it shaped every decision she made as a parent. After Keyshawn's death, Natasha became stricter, more protective, limiting where her daughters could go and what they could do. She was trying to shield them from a world that had already taken one of her children. But on that summer night, despite all her precautions and fears, the violence she had tried so desperately to keep at bay would find her family again. The party continued into the early morning hours. Music played, conversations flowed, and for a few precious hours, these women existed in a bubble of joy and friendship. Nobody saw the danger approaching until it was far too late.
A man pulled up and he yelled out, "I got you, bitches," before he started firing at a crowd of 9 women.
Just before 1 o'clock in the morning, as the party was winding down and people were probably starting to think about heading home, a black Jeep pulled up to the gathering. The vehicle itself was unremarkable, just another SUV on a Chicago street. That was until multiple masked gunmen emerged from the vehicle, their faces hidden, their intentions clear. And then, according to witness accounts, they shouted phrases like, "We got you," before unleashing a barrage of gunfire on the unsuspecting partygoers. The attack was swift and brutal, lasting only moments before the assailants fled back to their vehicle and sped away into the darkness. They came to inflict maximum damage and then disappear, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos and devastation. When the gunfire finally stopped and the smoke began to clear, 9 people lay wounded. The injuries ranged from grazing wounds to life-threatening gunshot trauma. A 28-year-old woman had been shot 8 times in the torso, her body riddled with bullets as she fought for her life. A 20-year-old was shot in the right thigh. A 24-year-old took a bullet to the right wrist. Another 28-year-old was hit in the right knee. A 30-year-old sustained 2 shots to the right shoulder and 2 more to the right arm. A 31-year-old was grazed in the leg and forearm. A 33-year-old suffered a grazing wound to the stomach, and another woman was grazed in the right arm. This scene was carnage, blood and screaming, and the desperate attempts of survivors to help their wounded friends while sirens wailed in the distance. But Kenesha Gaines had been shot in the face, and the injury was catastrophic. As emergency responders flooded the scene, Kenesha was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, where medical teams fought desperately to save her life. But the damage was too severe, and shortly after arriving at the hospital, 21-year-old Kenesha Gaines was pronounced dead, becoming the sole fatality in what would be classified as a mass shooting.
It's heartbreaking that a mother has to bury her 21-year-old daughter that leaves 2 kids.
The phone call that every parent dreads came from Natasha Graham in the early morning darkness. "Your child has been shot. Come to the hospital." But by the time she arrived, it was already too late. Kenesha Gaines, her 21-year-old daughter, the mother of her 2 young grandchildren, was gone. Natasha spent hours at the morgue that day, having to identify her daughter's body, grappling with the reality that her mind refused to accept. "It's been a hard thing to even accept that this is her. This can't be her," she would later tell reporters, her voice heavy with the kind of grief that changes a person forever.
Unbearably hurt. That's my oldest daughter.
But Kenesha's death wasn't just a tragedy for her mother. She left behind a 3-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter who, in the days following her death, kept asking for their mommy, unable to comprehend why she wasn't coming home. Those children were too young to understand death, too young to process the permanence of what had happened. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that their mother is never coming back?
Our kids, our teenagers should be able to go hang out. Our young kids should be able to play outside.
The grief and rage in Natasha's public statements cut straight to the heart of what makes this kind of violence so devastating. She was confronting the reality that young people in Chicago cannot safely gather for a birthday party without fear of being shot.
This should be allowed. It shouldn't always be violence every time the young adults decide to go and hang out.
Kenesha's father, Michael Gaines, joined Natasha in mourning, and together the family launched a GoFundMe campaign to cover funeral expenses. The financial burden of an unexpected death is something that often gets overlooked in these stories, but it's very real. The fundraiser, organized by Tasha Graham, had a goal of $20,000 to help the family give Kenesha a proper burial. In the immediate aftermath, they had raised $965. Meanwhile, the woman who had been shot 8 times remained in critical condition at Mount Sinai Hospital, fighting for her life. Her identity was never publicly released, but her struggle represented the other side of this tragedy, the survivors who would carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives.
Yes, Karen, of course, the neighborhood in shambles, very much on edge. That's the condition of neighborhood residents this afternoon after that violence erupted. And you are right. While one of those 8 women who was wounded remains hospitalized in critical condition this afternoon, the mother of the victim is remembering a daughter taken too soon.
As police are looking for multiple shooters involved in this very brazen crime over the weekend, local agencies are also coming together to help the community heal.
This is resources and offered to anybody that lives in the community, but the victims, they didn't live in Lawndale.
Inside Deliverance Temple of the Apostolic Faith Church, CPD's Crime Victim Services Unit.
We need help, and I don't know where that help comes from.
Overnight Saturday, 9 people were shot, including 8 women, while attending a luau-themed party. Police say a black Jeep approached the area. Multiple offenders jumped out and began shooting into the crowd. 21-year-old Kenesha Gaines, a mother of 2, was shot in the face and killed.
Anytime a man or a woman can look at a woman, realizing she's that canal that brings forth birth and that nurturing part of our society, and feel it's okay to gun them down like they're rats on the street or like they're nothing, they have lost their natural affection.
It happened at 15th and Keeler around 1 a.m. Pastor Mark Atkins heard the rapid gunshots.
To walk around the corner from my house to the church, you have to walk through so much different drug traffic. You have to make sure that you're not getting shot at.
The community response was immediate and heartfelt.
And I'm tearing up because I have a 15-year-old daughter, and to think that I'll let her go out into the world and something like this tragically happened to have a good time at a luau. I'm heartbroken.
Local alderperson Monique Scott expressed her emotional reaction, identifying personally with the fear that any parent in Chicago lives with. The knowledge that sending your child out into the world means accepting a level of risk that shouldn't exist. Community activist Andrew Holmes raised a question that many people were asking. Why would someone target a group of women at a peaceful gathering?
There's a coward amongst our community who will take out their frustration and shoot women.
The gendered nature of this violence wasn't lost on observers. This wasn't gang members shooting at rival gang members, nor was this a robbery gone wrong. This was multiple armed men specifically targeting a group of women who were doing nothing more threatening than celebrating a birthday. The questions of motive became even more pressing because of this detail. What could possibly justify this level of violence against women who posed no threat?
We're supposed to protect our women in our communities.
If it's your son, if it's your grandson, if it's your nephew, if it's your friend, if it's your cousin, we must speak out.
The Chicago Police Department's Crime Victim Services Unit quickly mobilized, setting up a one-day assistance center on July 31st, 2023, at Deliverance Temple Church of the Apostolic Faith, located at 1457 South Kamensky Avenue.
They are going to be offering confidential counseling, victim services for children. Detectives will be on hand to get any tips.
The center operated from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m., offering counseling, therapy dogs, compensation applications, and stress relief resources to survivors and community members traumatized by the shooting. But this marked only the second such pop-up center in a year, following an October 2022 mass shooting, and community leaders like Rabbi Michael Ben Yosef and alderperson Monique Scott criticized its brevity. One day of support services, they argued, was woefully inadequate for addressing the long-term trauma that gun violence inflicts on communities like North Lawndale. The psychological wounds don't heal in 24 hours. This shooting wasn't happening in isolation. It was part of a violent weekend in Chicago that saw 29 shootings citywide, injuring 47 people and claiming 5 lives. By September of 2023, Chicago had recorded 271 murders and 1,074 shootings, numbers that reflected an ongoing crisis of gun violence that disproportionately affected Black communities like North Lawndale. In fact, Chicago led the entire United States with 32 mass shootings in 2023, a statistic that speaks to the depth of the problem facing the city. North Lawndale itself was identified as an area of particular vulnerability, a historically underserved neighborhood where poverty, lack of economic opportunity, and gang dynamics created conditions ripe for violence. The residents of North Lawndale weren't asking for much. They just wanted to be able to celebrate birthdays without fear of being shot. They wanted their children to play outside without constant worry. They wanted to feel safe in their own community. But those basic expectations felt increasingly out of reach.
Our teenagers should be able to go hang out. Our young kids should be able to play outside.
As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, something deeply troubling became apparent. No arrests had been made. No suspects had been identified. The motive remained unknown. And most disturbingly, according to family members, the women who had been at the party with Kenesha that night weren't talking.
The reason I say quote-unquote homegirls is because after I did a little more investigation, I seen a live video where Kenesha's sister, if I'm not mistaken, was speaking out saying that those friends were fake.
Kenesha's aunt, Michelle G., took to social media to express the family's frustration, highlighting what she saw as a betrayal by people who claimed to be Kenesha's friends.
The friends had started blocking the family members from access to anything and just steady posting Nisha online.
The optics were painful to witness. These so-called friends were publicly mourning Kenesha on social media, posting rest in peace messages and sharing photos, but when the family asked questions about what happened that night or who might have been responsible, they were met with silence or actively blocked.
And so it was making the family mad. Like, how would you sit up here and say rest in peace to your friend and that's your best friend, but you won't even tell us who did it, which I understand.
This pattern of silence is one of the most frustrating aspects of unsolved shootings in Chicago. The Chicago Police Department, through Area 4 detectives, urged the community to provide anonymous tips via calling 312-746-8252. Interim CPD Superintendent Fred Waller emphasized the need to build trust with residents to encourage cooperation, acknowledging that fear of retaliation and deep-seated distrust of police often prevented witnesses from coming forward. But in this case, it wasn't just strangers who were staying silent. It was people who supposedly cared about Kenesha, people who had been at the party with her, people who might have crucial information about what happened. Natasha Graham made a public plea that transcended her personal loss, stating that her concerns extended beyond just her daughter. These children, not only my daughter, but every child that gets shot. Her words captured a mother's evolution from personal grief to community advocate, understanding that Kenesha's death was part of a much larger pattern of violence that claimed young Black lives with alarming regularity. And here's where the story gets even more disturbing. As of December 2025, more than 2 years after the shooting, no arrests, identified suspects, or a clear motive have been made.
To this day, I still haven't seen any actual update about any suspects, any person of interest, nothing of that matter. Nobody has been talking, and if they have, it has not hit the news.
The case has effectively gone cold, joining the ranks of unsolved shootings that haunt Chicago's most vulnerable neighborhoods. There has been some progress on the citywide level. While 2025 saw remarkable improvements in homicide clearance rates, with an 87% rate in January, and overall violent crime was down 21.6%, homicides down 32.3%, and shootings down 37.4%, these improvements didn't necessarily translate to solving older cases like Kenesha's. Chicago even experienced what officials called the safest summer since the 1960s, a remarkable turnaround that brought hope to many residents. Peacekeeping programs contributed significantly to these declines, with peacekeepers helping to mediate conflicts before they escalated to violence. But advocates consistently called for sustained investment in mental health services and economic development to break the cycles of trauma that perpetuated violence in communities like North Lawndale. Despite citywide improvements, North Lawndale recorded 18 homicides in 2025, remaining a high-risk area where poverty and gang dynamics continue to complicate both prevention and resolution of violent crimes. For Kenesha's family, these statistics and policy discussions offered little comfort. Social media continued to amplify discussions of misogyny, the specific intersection of anti-Black racism and misogyny that might explain why a group of Black women became targets.
So I'm going to continue to be the strong one. I'm going to help my family, and we're going to make it past this. Well, what you got left, you just try and hold on to it as close as you can. Don't let your kids outside.
Her words revealed the impossible calculus that parents in high-violence neighborhoods have to make. How do you let your children live their lives when living their lives might get them killed? More than 2 years later, those cowards are still free. They face no consequences for taking Kenesha's life and traumatizing 8 other women. Do you also think that the friends keeping quiet about the events of that night is suspicious? Let me know what you think in the comments section.